The Whitmore and Associates building never slept, but after 9 in the evening it exhaled. The cleaning crew arrived at 9:15. Ethan Calloway knew this because he had memorized it, the way he had memorized everything about the people who moved through his building without him ever really seeing them. That was the word for it, he supposed. Seeing. He had surveillance feeds on 3 monitors in his corner office on the 32nd floor. He watched the lobby, the stairwells, the server room. He watched because it was his building and his company and his responsibility, and because trust in his experience was a thing you verified before you extended. He had not always been this way. But that was a different story, one he did not tell at dinner parties. The woman who caught his attention on a Tuesday in late October was not doing anything remarkable. She was wiping down the glass partition outside the boardroom, moving the cloth in slow, overlapping circles. The overhead light caught her dark hair where it had slipped from a loose knot at the back of her neck. She paused once to push her glasses up with the back of her wrist, leaving a small smudge she immediately noticed and corrected. Then she moved to the next pane. Her name, according to the agency roster he had reviewed that morning, was Nadia Ferreira. She had been placed with Calloway and Associates 3 weeks prior. Contract employee, full-time evenings, no complaints from building management. No issues flagged. That was precisely the problem. Ethan leaned back in his chair and watched the feed. Everyone had issues flagged eventually. Late arrivals. Missed sections. A broken supply cart reported twice before being replaced. Nadia Ferreira had none of that. Her timesheets were exact. Her supply logs were neat and precise. And twice now, the building manager, Tom Breck, had mentioned her name in passing with that particular tone people used when they wanted to recommend someone without overstepping. "She's very thorough," Tom had said. Ethan had nodded and moved on, but the word had stayed with him. Thorough. In his industry, in 15 years of running a mid-sized architectural firm through a recession, through a pandemic, through a partnership dissolution that cost him 18 months and a friendship, thorough was either a virtue or a performance. He had learned the hard way that it was usually the latter. That night, he stayed later than usual. He told his assistant, Drew Langford, to go home at 8. He ordered nothing from the kitchen. He sat with the lights low and a stack of tender documents he was not actually reading, and he waited. At 9:22, the elevator chimed on the 32nd floor. He heard her before he saw her, the quiet roll of a cart with a slightly stiff wheel. He had noticed the sound before but never traced it to its source. Now he did. He watched the frosted glass panel of his office door and kept very still. He heard her knock twice on the open door frame of the adjacent meeting room. She waited 3 full seconds before entering, which was the protocol for rooms that might still have people inside. He had written that protocol himself, 4 years ago, after an associate complained about being startled. He had never imagined he would one day be grateful for it. He waited until she had moved past his office, then he got up and made his way quietly down the hall. He found a reason to be near the supply corridor. He stood just around the corner from the boardroom, back against the wall, and he listened. She was talking to someone. Low, warm, in Portuguese, he thought, though he wasn't certain. Then a pause, and she switched to English. "Don't worry about it. I'll be home by 1. "Yes, I promise. Get some sleep." A family member, most likely. He filed it away without knowing why. He returned to his office and sat back down and looked at the documents without reading them and understood that something had shifted in the way he was paying attention. The experiment began the following week. He was not proud of it later. He understood even then that it said something unflattering about him, that the instinct to test was still so present after all these years, coiled up somewhere near the base of his thinking like a bad habit he had mistaken for caution. But he did it anyway. He left his wallet on the boardroom table on a Wednesday. Not careless, not dramatic. Just there, beside a legal pad and a half-finished bottle of sparkling water. He made sure the wallet was visible without being obvious. Inside, $200 in cash, his Amex, and a business card for a restaurant he had not been to in years. He turned off the lights, locked nothing, and left the floor at 8:50. He did not go home. He went to the 28th floor, to an empty meeting room with a monitor he had remoted into the security feed, and he sat in the dark and he waited. Nadia Ferreira arrived at 9:18. She moved through the floor in the same pattern he had begun to recognize. Lobby-adjacent offices first, hallway baseboards, washrooms on the south side, then the boardroom. She entered at 9:41. He could see her from two angles. She noticed the wallet immediately. Of course she did. She was thorough. She paused, which was not unusual. She looked at it for a moment that felt long to him, even though it was likely less than 5 seconds. Then she set down her cloth and picked the wallet up and opened it. Ethan held his breath. She did not take anything. She looked at the ID window, the way you do when you want to know whose it is. Then she closed it. She looked around the room once, the way people do when they are thinking. Then she walked to the door of the boardroom and stood in the hallway and looked toward his office and back toward the elevators, as though deciding which direction would be more useful. She chose neither. She went back to the supply cart, pulled out a small Ziploc bag she used for lost items, the kind left in meeting rooms after client lunches, a forgotten phone charger, a child's mittens someone had brought in from outside, and she placed the wallet inside. She sealed it. She took a square of paper from a notepad and wrote on it, and he watched her tape the note to the outside of the bag, before walking to the building manager's station at the end of the hall and placing the bag in the secure lost and found drawer. Then she went back to the boardroom and finished cleaning it. Ethan sat in the dark meeting room on the 28th floor for a long time after she had moved on. He had the feed still open. He watched her work. He did not reach for his phone. He did not review the tender documents. He just sat there in the low blue glow of the monitor, watching a woman clean a building she did not own with the same care she would have taken if she had. He retrieved the wallet the following morning and read her note. It said, "Found in boardroom B, approx. 9:40 p.m. Contents appear intact. Left for safekeeping. NF." 3 letters and a dash. No name spelled out, no expectation of recognition, no request. He folded the note and put it in his coat pocket and did not say anything to anyone. The next thing happened on a Thursday, in the 3rd week of November. The office had hosted a client reception that evening, and the catering team had run long, and by the time the last champagne flute was collected and the folding tables were broken down, it was nearly 11. Ethan was doing what he often did after functions, staying behind to review the space before security did their final sweep. He did not entirely trust that things were in order unless he saw them himself. It was not a virtue. It was a compulsion with polished edges. He was in the kitchen corridor when he heard voices from the far end of the floor. One of them was Nadia Ferreras. The other was older, slower, and clearly distressed. He moved closer without making himself known. The second voice belonged to Don Azevedo, a man in his late 60s who had worked maintenance in the building since before Ethan's firm had moved in. Don's wife had been ill on and off for 2 years. Ethan knew this, the way he knew most things about the people who kept his building running, abstractly, the way you know facts without really knowing them. Don was saying something about having missed the last bus. His car was in the shop. He lived in Scarborough. Nadia said without a pause, "I'm driving east anyway. I can drop you as far as Kennedy." Don said that was too much trouble. Nadia said, also without pause, "I'm going to be on that highway regardless. Sit down for 5 minutes. I need to finish the south washrooms and then we'll go." Ethan stood in the corridor for a moment longer than necessary. Then he moved back toward his office without a word. He did not sleep well that night. Not because he was troubled exactly, but because he kept thinking about the note. About 3 letters and a dash. About someone who did the right thing at 9:40 at night in an empty building with no audience. He thought about what his first business partner, a man named Gerald Webb, had said to him the day he had cleared out his desk. Gerald, who had been writing himself quiet little bonuses for 14 months and who had looked Ethan in the eye and smiled at every weekly check-in during all of it, had said in his exit interview, "You trust numbers, Ethan. You should have trusted people." Ethan had thought about that a great deal over the years. He had mostly concluded that Gerald Webb was not qualified to give advice about trust, but lately he had been less certain. He returned to the building on a Saturday morning, which he sometimes did. The offices were quiet, the weekend skeleton crew not yet in. He was reviewing a set of elevations in the main drafting room when he heard something in the hallway. He looked up. Through the glass, he could see Nadia Ferreira kneeling by the baseboard near the fire exit, holding a small framed photograph. She was holding it carefully, the way you hold something that belongs to someone else. She turned it over, looked at the back, turned it again. Then she set it gently on the edge of the windowsill, propped upright so it was visible, and placed a small piece of tape on the wall below it with a note, found near stairwell. NF. The photo, Ethan would later discover, was of his late mother. It had been in a box of his own things that he had moved to a shelf in the drafting room after the office reno 2 years prior and had apparently fallen at some point, slid behind a cabinet and gone unnoticed. He had not known it was missing. He had assumed it was at home. He sat with that for a long time. The problem was that none of this was suspicious. That was the problem. Every instinct he had trained to watch for the gap between performance and character was turning up the same answer, and the answer was that there was no gap. He could not find the seam. He could not locate the moment where she stops trying. She did not seem to be trying at all. She just was. He found this unsettling in a way he could not easily name. The confrontation, when it came, was not one he had engineered. He had not planned it. That distinction mattered to him afterward. On a Monday in early December, he was on a call in his office when he heard raised voices in the hallway. He ended the call faster than he meant to and came out to find one of the junior associates, a young man named Brett Simmons, who had been with the firm 8 months and who Ethan had been quietly reconsidering for reasons unrelated to this, standing near the supply cart with his arms crossed. "The night cleaning contract doesn't cover private offices," Brett was saying. "That's not how this works." Nadia Ferreira stood opposite him, her voice level. "I was asked by building management to include the East Wing tonight. I can show you the work order," Brett said, in the tone of someone who had decided the outcome before the conversation started, that he didn't care what the work order said. He said the East Wing included his office, and he didn't want anyone in there. Nadia said still calmly, "That's your right. I'll leave your office. I'll note the exclusion on the log." Brett said that she should do that, and that while she was at it she could also note that he thought the whole arrangement was unnecessary. He used a word after that which Ethan would not repeat later and which landed in the hallway like something dropped from a height. Nadia went quiet. She did not respond. She turned back to her cart. Ethan said, "Brett." Brett turned. He registered Ethan's expression with a delay, the way people do when they have not expected the audience. Ethan said his name again quietly and directed him back toward the East Wing with a look that was not open for interpretation. Brett went. Ethan turned to Nadia, who was straightening the supply cart with steady hands and an expression he could not quite read. "I'm sorry you were spoken to that way," Ethan said. She looked at him. It was the first time they had held eye contact for more than a polite second. She had dark eyes behind those dark-framed glasses, and she looked at him the way people look when they are deciding whether something is genuine. "It's not the first time," she said. "It won't be the last." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "Still, it shouldn't happen here." She nodded once and turned back to work. He stood in the hallway for a moment after she had moved on, aware that he had said almost nothing, and that it had still felt harder than most conversations he had in a given week. The next morning he arrived early and found a note on his desk, slipped under the edge of his keyboard. On a plain card in the same small, careful print. "Thank you for last night. That was enough. NF." 3 words and a dash. He put it in the same coat pocket as the first one. Brett Simmons resigned at the end of the week, which was not entirely connected to the incident in the hallway, but was not entirely unconnected either. Ethan did not lose sleep over this. What he did lose sleep over was harder to say. He had begun, without intending to notice things. The small lavender sachet she had placed on the windowsill of the server room, which was always cold and which she had apparently decided needed something. The careful way she restacked the magazines in the client lounge so that the spines were aligned and the covers faced the same direction. The fact that she always left the drafting room with the pencils in the tray, points up, which was how his team preferred them and which no one had ever told her. She noticed things. She took care of things. And she did not seem to require anyone to notice that she was doing it. This was, he had come to understand, the thing that unsettled him most. Not her competence, not her integrity, but the completeness of her indifference to recognition. It was a kind of wholeness he had not encountered often and did not entirely know how to be around. It happened on a night in late December that he would return to in his mind for a long time afterward. He had been in the building late. A project deadline, a revision cycle that had gone 2 rounds longer than expected. The design team had left at 9. Drew had left at 8:30. The floor was dark except for his office and the ambient glow from the city below the windows. He was aware of Nadia Ferreira's presence on the floor, the way he had become generally aware of it. A background note, steady and unhurried. At some point around 11 he went to the kitchen to make coffee and found her there, sitting on one of the stools at the high counter, not on her phone, not eating. Just sitting with her hands flat on the counter and her eyes toward the window. She looked up when he came in. There was something in her face that was different from its usual composure. Not distress exactly, but a kind of tiredness that went deeper than physical. He said, "Long night." She said, "My mother had a fall this afternoon. She's all right." They kept her for observation. He stood there with the coffee carafe in one hand. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it, which surprised him slightly. She said, "I almost didn't come in. But she told me to. She said she'd be embarrassed if I sat there watching her sleep." He poured 2 cups without thinking. He set one on the counter in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. He sat down across from her, which was also not something he had planned. They did not talk for a while. He did not find this uncomfortable, which was unusual. He generally found silence with people he did not know well to be something that needed to be managed. This felt different. She said, eventually, "You stay late most nights." He said, "Habit." She said, "Habit or preference?" He considered this longer than the question required. "Preference," he admitted. "It's quieter. I think better when the building is empty." She said, "Me too. I know that's strange for this job." He said, "It's not strange." She turned the cup in her hands. He noticed she had a small callus on the inside of her right thumb from the handle of the supply cart, he thought, or perhaps from writing. She noticed him noticing and did not seem bothered by it. He asked, because he had wanted to for weeks and had not found a reasonable moment, why this job? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was a registered nurse for 6 years. Surgical unit. And then I made a mistake. Or I was told I made a mistake. There was a patient, and a medication incident, and an investigation, and at the end of it, I had a citation on my file." She paused. "I didn't dispute it. I probably should have. But I was so tired by then. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of feeling like every room I walked into, someone had already decided something about me." She looked at him steadily. "So I took a step back. Deliberately. I wanted to do work where I could just be reliable and invisible and not have to justify anything to anyone." He sat with that. He said, "Invisible doesn't sound like what you wanted. It sounds like what you settled for." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You're probably right." He said, "The citation, was it fair?" She said no. Just that, no hesitation, no defense, no elaboration. He nodded. They finished their coffee. She went back to work. He went back to his elevations. But something had changed in the building that night. Some atmospheric thing, as though the air pressure had adjusted slightly and everything was sitting at a different angle. He pulled her agency file the following morning. He read it once, carefully, the way he read contracts. He noted the contact information for the nursing regulatory body. He noted the name of the hospital where the incident had occurred. He did not make any calls that day. He thought about it for 3 days, the way he thought about decisions that mattered. He spoke to the firm's HR consultant. Not about names, just about process, about what it meant to advocate for someone's record being reviewed. On the 4th day, he made 2 calls. The review process took 6 weeks. He was not supposed to know what happened with it. He had simply submitted a formal request for reassessment on her behalf, with supporting documentation he had gathered carefully, and with a letter he had written 3 times before he was satisfied with it. He signed it with his full name and his firm's letterhead, and he did not tell her. In the meantime, the days continued. She cleaned the building. He ran the firm. They spoke sometimes, when their paths crossed after 9, in the kitchen or the hallway, or once in the parking garage when they both happened to be leaving at the same time and stood in the cold for a few minutes in the way you do when the conversation doesn't quite want to end. He learned that she had a daughter, 7 years old, who was apparently building something large and complicated out of cardboard in their living room and had been for several months. He learned that her mother lived with her. He learned that she had lived in Toronto for 11 years, from Sao Paulo originally, and that she still dreamed in Portuguese sometimes. She learned that he had started the firm at 31 with a business partner who had betrayed him, that he had never fully replaced the trust that broke in that room, that he was 43 and had been told by exactly 3 people he respected that he worked too much. She said, "Do you think they were right?" He said, unambiguously. She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, genuinely, unguarded. It was a quiet sound, but it changed the room. The night of the staff appreciation event in January, Ethan stood at the front of the main floor meeting space and looked out at the group of people assembled. Junior architects, project managers, admin staff, the building crew, contract workers who kept the place running, and he thought about what he actually wanted to say. He said a number of things about the past year that were true. He thanked people by name, which he did not always do, and he meant it, which he hoped came across. And then he said something he had not planned. He said, "I want to say something about what makes a workplace worth coming to. Not the projects, not the contracts, the people who show up consistently, who do the work without needing recognition, who make the small choices correctly when nobody is watching. Those people hold the whole thing together." He did not look at Nadia Ferreira when he said it. He looked at no one in particular. But afterward, when people were collecting their coats, she passed by him near the door and said, very quietly, "That was a good thing to say." He said, "I meant it." She nodded and went to get her coat. He had wanted to say something else. He did not that night. The letter from the nursing college arrived on a Thursday in February. She told him about it on the Friday, because she wanted to, he thought, not because she felt she owed him an explanation. She came to his office at 9:15 after the day staff had gone. She stood in the doorway and said the citation was removed. She paused. Someone submitted a request for reassessment with a very thorough supporting letter. He said nothing. She said, "I think I know who it was." He said, "You don't have to thank me." She said, "I know I don't. I want to." He looked up from his desk. She was leaning against the doorframe with her arms loosely crossed, and she was looking at him with an expression he could not have described easily. Not gratitude exactly, not relief. Something more complicated, the way people look when they did not know they were waiting for something until it arrived. He said, "You should go back to it, nursing, if you want to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking about that." He said, "There's a community health program at U of T. I know someone on the admissions committee." She said, "Ethan." He said, "I'm not suggesting anything you haven't already earned." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you for actually seeing me." He didn't know what to do with that. He said, "You made it easy." She smiled at that, small and real, and said goodnight, and he heard the cartwheels down the hallway, and then the elevator, and then nothing. He sat in the quiet office for a while after that, looking out at the city. He had grown up watching his father operate from behind glass, behind desks, behind the particular kind of formality that men of his generation mistook for dignity. He had learned the lesson without meaning to, and had carried it into every room he had ever run. He thought about the note in his coat pocket, 2 of them now, 3 letters, a dash. He thought about a woman who had arrived at his building with no particular ambition to be noticed, who had simply done everything correctly and let it speak, and who had somehow, in doing so, changed the air pressure of the entire floor. He thought about what it meant to trust someone not because you had verified them, not because you had tested them, but because you had, over time, simply paid attention. He had spent a very long time being careful. He was not entirely sure, for the first time, that careful was the same as right. She left the cleaning contract in March, which he had expected. She enrolled in the program in April, which he had quietly ensured was possible. They had lunch twice during that spring, on the patio of a place near the university she had suggested. easy and unhurried, the kind of lunch where neither person is performing anything. He gave her a graduation card when she finished her first year. Inside, he wrote 4 words and left the 5th implied. Still the most thorough. She sent him a photo from the hallway of the community health clinic where she had just completed her first shift. She was in scrubs, her hair in the same loose knot, her glasses slightly crooked, and she was not looking at the camera. She was looking down at a chart, serious and focused and entirely in the right place. He kept the photo. He did not analyze why. In September, she called him on a Sunday morning, which was new, and said she was going to be near his neighborhood and did he want coffee. He said yes before she finished the sentence. They sat outside at a small place on Bloor Street as the last of the summer hung in the air and the leaves just beginning to turn, and they talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing in the way that people only manage when they have stopped trying to make an impression on each other. At the end of it, walking back toward the street, she said, "You seem different." He said, "Different how?" She said, "Less armored." He thought about that. He said, "I've been working on it." She looked at him sideways, and there was something in her face that was warm and straightforward and entirely without performance. He said, "I should tell you that I'm better at this than I used to be, whatever this is." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm also still occasionally impossible." She said, "I've noticed." They stood at the corner for a moment. The city moved around them. He thought about Gerald Webb and about trust and about all the years he had spent treating caution like a virtue when it was really just fear with a better wardrobe. He thought about a note on a playing card, 3 letters and a dash. He thought about what it cost her to come back and what it cost him to let her. Then he said, "Same time next Sunday?" She said yes. And that, as it turned out, was enough. I keep thinking about the wallet, not the money in it, not even the note she left, just the image of her standing in that empty boardroom at 9:40 at night, making the right call when there was absolutely no reason to accept that it was right. No one was watching. No one would have known, and she did it anyway. That's the part that stays with me. I've spent most of my adult life believing that people reveal themselves under pressure, that you have to test things, verify things, watch closely enough and long enough before you can afford to trust. And in some narrow, technical sense, I wasn't wrong. Ethan Callaway wasn't wrong either. The world does contain people who perform goodness without practicing it. He had learned that the painful way, and so had I, and maybe so have you. But here's what I didn't understand for a long time. There's a difference between being careful and being closed. Caution, real caution, the kind that actually protects you, requires you to stay open long enough to see clearly. What Ethan was doing wasn't caution. It was a door he had locked from the inside and called a security system. Nadia didn't break that door down. She just kept being herself until the lock stopped making sense. That's the thing about integrity. And I mean the real kind, not the kind you perform when someone's looking. It doesn't require an audience. Nadia returned the wallet. She drove Dawn home. She placed that photograph where someone would find it. She did all of it without announcement, without expectation, without even the hope of being noticed. And the reason she could do that consistently, in the cold and the quiet of an office building at 10:30 on a Tuesday, is because it wasn't a strategy. It was just who she was. That kind of character is built slowly. It doesn't arrive fully formed. It comes from making small, honest choices so many times that they stop feeling like choices and start feeling like breathing. That's what I think of when I think about moral backbone. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic stand, but the quiet accumulation of small decisions made correctly when it would have been easier not to. And then there's what Nadia had to do internally to keep going after the hospital, after the citation, after being told in the softest possible bureaucratic language that her version of events didn't count. That takes something else entirely. It takes the kind of inner steadiness that doesn't depend on being validated by the outside world. She stepped back deliberately. She kept showing up. She didn't let bitterness make her small. I find that genuinely hard. I find it harder the older I get and the more I understand what it costs. What changed things for Ethan wasn't a single revelation. It was attention. He paid attention long enough and honestly enough to let what he was seeing actually land. That sounds simple. It isn't. It requires a particular kind of intelligence, not the kind that processes information quickly, but the kind that can hold something uncomfortable long enough to learn from it. The kind that can look at its own assumptions and ask whether they're still earning their keep. He saw her, and in seeing her, he started to see himself more clearly too. I think about that note she left. 3 letters and a dash. No name spelled out, no need for credit, just the small, clean fact of what she had done. I think that's the whole story, really, right there in 3 letters and a dash.